All right, well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the January 17th, 2023 Zoning Review Committee meeting. On July 16th, 2022, Governor Baker signed into law an act relative to extending certain state of emergency accommodations, which, among other things, extends the expiration of provisions pertaining to the open meeting law to March 31st, 2023. Specifically, this extension allows public bodies to continue holding meetings remotely. This meeting is being conducted remotely online through Zoom meeting app. Public participation is encouraged through the app or by the phone. This is in accordance with the governor's executive order. A recording will be posted on the town website. I guess everyone's got their name up, so I guess we're good with that. So first on the agenda, we have the approval of meeting minutes from August 31st, 2022. Can I get a motion to approve those minutes?
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the minutes as printed.
I have a motion. Can I get a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right, that is approved.
Abstain, just so you know, I wasn't at that meeting.
You can still, if you watch it, you can still vote, as you know. Okay, review timeline for zoning amendment, public hearing and warrant articles prepared spring, May 9th town meeting. This is quite a ambitious agenda that we have here that we'll be looking forward to. We're meeting tonight. Eric has also suggested that we get together just the committee members on February 7th. Does that work for everyone? February 7th is the first Tuesday in February, which I'm fine with. Joe, you're good? Everyone's on mute. I can't hear you.
Yes, that sounds good.
Larry's giving me the thumbs up. Jeremy, you good with that date? No? All right, we don't know about Adriana. So we'll assume, Jeremy, is it because it's too early or is that date out altogether?
Unfortunately, I have another meeting at night on that day.
I have meetings that night.
Oh, I know you guys aren't out. This is just for,
Okay, that's fine.
this is just for us.
Okay.
All right, well, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of other dates that we can play with. So I guess we'll just have to do it without Jeremy. Is this a good time for everyone? Because I guess we could do this one in person, actually. Does that work for everybody, or do we want to stay remote?
I can do either. I know that on Tuesdays I can help my wife with Uber duties if the meeting started half an hour later at 6:30. Gives me a chance to get one of the kids home.
I would actually prefer 7 if that works for everybody.
That works for me too.
7, all right?
Yeah, that's
All
fine.
right, 7 good? Okay. And Eric Eldridge, you're good with that date and time? Okay. So
Yes.
we'll go 7 o'clock on the 7th. And then the next date that we have on here would be March 1st or 7th. The 1st is no good for me. I could commit to the 7th though. And Bob and Judy, are you available on the 7th of March?
I'm going to check right now. So I usually have a standing meeting in another town the first Tuesday of the month. I probably can have, if I can join remotely, I should be okay.
Okay. Yep.
That would be my only constraint.
Yeah, it looks like we can do remotely right up until March 31st, and hopefully our new governor will extend it even further, because it certainly makes a lot of sense to not have you folks drive all the way up here.
We're all hoping that the legislature will do the right thing.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
if the committee or board has a quorum, then they can have remote participants connect that way
Yeah,
without a change even if he didn't update the legislation, but we all hope that he will.
Right, but we're still within we're still within the March 31st, so we're fine with that. So we'll do that one at 6 o'clock then. Does that work for you and Bob?
I'm gonna put this in my calendar. I just can't totally guarantee it. My other meeting typically starts at 5:30 and ends at 7.
Would 7 o'clock be better for you remotely, or?
I can do it. Yeah, from 7 o'clock on, I'm available. I don't know if that messes you guys up, but I'm just,
So March 7th at 7, does that work for you, Bob?
That works for me. Yes, it does.
And everybody else on board with that? 7 o'clock? Yes, yes, yes. Okay, so 7 o'clock, March 7th. And then we would have our planning board hearing. We've got a couple of dates here. Eric, why don't you chime in on this one, because it would be either the 16th or April 6th. And in your notes, it says planning board public hearings, hearing or hearings. Do we need two? Or what's your thought on that, Eric?
Well, depending on the length of the topic and discussion that might come from the public, it's usually helpful to plan on 2. And if you only need 1, great. In March, there is a 2-week gap between the second meeting and the April meetings. So that's why I said if there's a possible alternate date or additional date of March 30th. So if we have the first public hearing on March 16th and the board doesn't complete its discussions about the language and or finalizing its recommendations for the warrant articles,
yep.
it'll need 1 more. Ideally, it might be good to have that conversation scheduled to continue on the 30th, but that would be a sort of an additional meeting for the planning board. Otherwise, it just pushes things out 1 more week to the 6th. That's difficult because the week of April 6th, let me just pull up
Isn't that the warrant deadline?
I'm just double checking to see what that week looks like. April.
I have it in my calendar that the warrant documents are due on April 6th.
April 6th to the 13th. Eric Eldridge, I mean, I don't, is it possible that you'd be meeting on a Thursday, the 6th, to close the warrant, or would it be more likely the 10th?
So it's probably going to be later. Hang on, let me just pull up the calendar for the Board of Selectmen, because for annual town meeting, it only has to be done at least 7 days prior to town meeting.
Mhm.
And I think we've got a lot of extra fluff in there.
The
on
10th
that.
would be 4 weeks before.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So, because I think, if I'm not mistaken, so town meeting is the 2nd of May. And I know that we've got a Board of
That was the-
Selectmen meeting
Isn't it
on the,
isn't it the second Tuesday in May? It's the first Tuesday
No.
in May?
correct, we flipped. So there is a select board meeting on the 10th, and there's one on the 24th
Of May?
Of April.
of April.
Okay, I'm sorry. Thank
And
you.
so for either one of those would be fine for closing the warrant articles. I mean, we should plan for the 10th.
Right.
Is what I would recommend. I know that we're not going to meet on the 7th. We're not currently scheduled to meet on the 17th. So if you do it on the 24th, that means that we have to close the warrant. We have to vote on everything. Now, you can have everything done materially on the 10th. And then if you're just tweaking and formatting and doing some different things, you can still do that after the 10th, after we close. It just needs to be, you can't make material changes.
Yep. Okay, so based on that, it sounds to me like the planning board isn't likely to need to have an unscheduled meeting on the 30th. They're safe to start the hearing on the 16th. And then based on that feedback, if adjustments are required, it gives us as a team or the planning board itself an extra week to make revisions before those hearings are continued on April 6th, but that's when we'd be expecting it to close.
What
Well,
time
the
would that
hearings
meeting
to be
be?
closed.
Sorry,
What's
What
that, Judy?
what time would the planning board meeting be?
The planning board meetings are consistently at 7 o'clock.
Okay, thanks.
All right, so yeah, so we'll plan for planning board meetings on March 16th and close it up on April 6th with the slight possibility that we can finish everything March 16th if we're ready. So let's plan on those two dates. And then so May 2nd is the town meeting. All right, so that works for everybody then. So we've got February 7th at 7 o'clock, which is just the committee and not Bob and Judy. Then on the 7th at 7 o'clock, we can meet in person and we can bring Bob and Judy in remotely, or do we want to stay remote on that? And we should probably stay remote on that just to be consistent, because I think we had difficulty hearing everybody at the last one, and I don't want to have that fall apart on that date. So
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to see people in person, but to be honest, having like all your stuff on your desk, if anybody needed hard copies of anything, I can make sure that they're available to you or deliver them to you in town. No deliveries for you, Judy and Bob, but yeah, so I think remotely the meetings themselves run and work pretty well. Sometimes better than in person when you're trying to get real work done and show things on a screen and make sure everybody sees the same thing.
So we don't need to be present on February 7th. Is that what you said?
that's correct.
Thank you.
And just a note for everybody, the April 6th possible continuation of the planning board public hearing, I will not be able to be.
Yep. So basically this committee will meet on the 7th by ourselves, and then everybody on March 7th, and then that's it. So we have one with just the committee and then one all together again before we go to the planning board on the 16th. So we've got an awful lot on our plate to try and get accomplished it get accomplished in 2 meetings. So I think maybe we should take a look at what we have and figure out what's realistic to try and pull together. Because I think as I'm looking at the agenda, we've got special permit site plan review. That's a big one. We've got split zone parcels. And then we have another one for sign regulation, and then we want to discuss clarifying table of uses. So of those 4 things that we're taught with, I just mentioned, let's prioritize here of what we want to do. And so that we can focus on at least 1 or 2 of these. I would think that discussion to expand or add things to the table of uses would probably be a good one that we could hit relatively easily. And none of these are easy, but I think that's one we could prioritize.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
So in the email that I had sent out, I did my best to try to suggest the prioritization of those issues, mostly in terms of importance and impact on the board and the community. So I listed them in order of separating the special permit and site plan review process, addressing sign regulations, then split zone parcels, then table of uses. I feel like if I have a second to explain the justification behind that, separating the special permit process and the site plan review helps to identify and set up a structure for the procedures for the planning board, which is like a fundamental building block for conducting the public hearings and reviewing plans for the board. And I really don't want to postpone making that improvement to the board's process. And sign regulations is listed as number 2 because, and this is partially a personal request or my interactions with the business community and the community itself. I've been mentioning to people that the town was expecting to review sign regulations for like a year and a half. And I was hoping it would be one of the first elements that the zoning review committee attempts to tackle. So that's why I put it as number 2. We did make some incremental improvements though on the last round, so that's helpful. But generally speaking, the business community is asking to see if the town's making progress to determine if there's improvements that can be made to the sign regulations. The split zone parcels, it's something that the town's been dealing with for quite some time, and it's an objective within the master plan. But it's not something that I think is prohibiting progress within the town, or there's any specific projects that are looking for clarification on how to proceed. So if that didn't happen to make it all the way through, I'm a little bit less concerned about its impact on the community until the next round. And then I listed table of uses as number 4 for 2 reasons. One, Judy had mentioned that she wasn't sure with regards to the amount of time she'd have to put a comprehensive amount of work into that section. And there's so many uses and so many components to look at that while the committee itself might have an opportunity to start addressing things with the table of uses, I think as you progress forward towards town meeting, the committee will have to decide, okay, well, we're not done working on the table of uses yet, but we do feel strongly enough about the following changes that we want to propose them in May. Or you turn around and say, we've done some work, but it's just not nearly complete enough. We're not going to present anything on the table of uses during this May 2nd cycle. It's going to wait until later. So I'm not sure if the committee's going to be able to identify whether or not you can present table of use amendments. It really depends on what you find and how strong your opinions are as you go through that work.
I think there's a lot of work to do on that table. I'm just being honest with you.
Sure, I agree.
If I might, I just related to priority number 3, the split lots. You have an email from Judy and I, a memo from Judy and I, and depending on how important this is to you, but also what your reaction is to how other towns have done it. This could be something very simple, because if there's something another town did and you say, well, that'll work for us, you're done. But if it, the discussion goes larger than that, and there's a variety of alternatives you want to think about looking to, then that probably is less of a priority.
Exactly. Thanks, Bob. Okay. Thanks, Chaz.
All right, well, let's start with the first one then. The special permit and site plan review, that's next on our agenda anyway, so let's discuss that if we could. I know Bob sent out a whole 5-pager here with his thoughts on it. So I guess we could I could open it up to Bob to talk about this a little bit, or I can throw in some of my 2 cents, but let's let Bob go first.
Okay, well, I kind of laid out sort of a little history of this whole issue. As we've mentioned before, it's very confusing in Massachusetts. It's because it's Massachusetts, and there's a variety of court decisions about what you can and can't do, and what actually is a site plan review process versus what is a special permit process. And as we noted originally in our audit, your site plan review process is exactly the same as a special permit process, pretty much, which in effect makes it, you have 2 special permit processes. And so the question is, one of the questions is why, what's the goal of a site plan process that just replicates the special permit process? And so at the end of the discussion paper here, we put together a number of questions that I think the town really needs to answer as to why you're doing it the way you're doing it, and how it could work in a more efficient manner, and a manner that was, I would say, in some ways more friendly to particular small businesses and new businesses and startup businesses. One of the things I pointed out there was you have a business district where every single business except one requires a special permit. why would you adopt a business district that's intended to allow businesses and then make everybody go through a special permit process? Is every business in a business district that much of a threat to the town that you have to go through a special permit process? That's highly, and I've never seen that before. I don't think Judy has either.
I have not.
So there's a variety of questions related to, your approach to land use permits, particularly in the business districts, and making a rational distinction between these two processes rather than melding them into calling them two different things, but acting as if they're one. So, there's a lot of flexibility for how the town can approach this, but I think there's some questions that you really need to answer about why you're doing it the way you're doing it, and could you be doing it in a more effective manner?
So I think that one of the reasons that we're doing it the way we're doing it is because it's always been that way. But I also think that the boards like to have some sort of oversight on any project that's coming through. Because in your on page 1 here, it just says that a site plan review, that the application cannot be denied. And that kind of concerns me a little bit, sitting on the planning board, if we should get something that was to come through that we really didn't like the type of business. We would want to have the flexibility to be able to deny that for any number of reasons. Years ago, we had strip clubs in town and they could set up anywhere and did. And we finally ended up creating a zone that they could only set up there. But I think that's probably why we have what we have here, because we've run into problems before that even though it complies with everything that is within that district, it could be something that we don't want. So maybe that's
a good point, Chaz. And I think it's the reason why when towns do adopt site plan review, they really think about what uses are those kinds of uses that need extra scrutiny, bars, restaurants, strip clubs, things that, noisy or have negative impact. You want to have special gas stations, whatever, you want to have a special permit process. But what uses, and there are a lot of uses. I mean, is a bookstore in a business district something you want to deny? What is the threat to the town from a bookstore in a business district? Simple uses, smaller uses, as I mentioned in the report, some towns use tiers. So smaller retail uses under whatever 15,000 square feet, 20, you can pick a number, go through site plan, but if they get bigger, they go through special permit, or if they have certain traffic impacts, you can do tiers. But to have all your businesses in your business districts be going through a site plan, a special permit process, you're really saying every single possible business that comes into the town of Tyngsborough is such a threat to the quality of life that we have to be able to deny it. And that's not the real world out there. You have a lot of uses that have come into your town that are perfectly fine, haven't caused any problems. Nobody's complained about them. They're the kind of businesses you want, you like, and so there is a distinction there between types of uses. And you don't give up, you can't deny it unless, there's a couple of conditions in which you can deny it, but you don't give up your ability to impose conditions. So if there's some aspect of the business that concerns you, you can impose conditions, whatever that is, the hours of operation, toning down the lighting, requiring certain parking standards. You can, the design of the building. So there are a lot of conditions you can use to control concerns about potential impacts that aren't, massive potential impacts. So it's not like you have no control over it. You have a lot of control over And if they can't meet the conditions, they don't build or move in or whatever.
I think that's one of the biggest points of confusion I see in the discussion about site plan review locally is that people think if you allow it by right, site plan review is essentially useless because they're going to do whatever they're going to do. And site plan review is an extremely powerful tool for regulating impacts for uses permitted as a right, if the bylaw is written correctly. So you've at least removed the, you know, the sort of concern about the special permit that I think is created for a lot of businesses that would probably go into a community, but say, I'm not going to go through that hassle to be able to do my business. But I get in front of the planning board and the planning board can impose conditions on the operation to address public health, public safety, aesthetics. I mean, things that typically get addressed in a site plan process. If the bylaw is written properly.
Which I guess we are not at this point, so. Well, I'd like to open this up to the board to get some comments. Joe, any thoughts?
I think I go along with looking at neighboring communities, and I think we could probably clarify and move along those guidelines that have been proposed. Making it overly burdensome and everything requiring a special permit doesn't make a lot of sense in a lot of cases.
Mr. Eldridge, your thoughts?
Well, I'm hearing a few key things, right? One is the way our current bylaws are, we're not as easy to work with as other communities, which can negatively impact us from a business standpoint. So, you know, I think we want to be business friendly. I think we do have some concerns based on history, and I think we can address those through, you know, we can do a site plan review. We can put conditions. And I think it's important for us to understand the best way to leverage those to not give up complete control. But I do think that rather than, you know, having blanket statements for all businesses that they need to go through this onerous process, there are clearly, as Bob had indicated, there are clearly businesses that fall into this today that we shouldn't have fallen to this in the future, because it's a lot of work on our side. It's a lot of things for the businesses themselves. And so I think if we look at which businesses we have concerns and categorize them, and then we look at the types of things that we want to control and have that make sure that we're covered under the conditions, I think it makes perfect sense to leverage something that the rest of the communities are doing. You know, we're clearly an outlier, and that's not, I don't want to sound harsh, but that's not a good thing in this particular situation. So I think looking at this and addressing, you know, we don't want to lose complete control, and we want to make sure that we have that. And we can do that. I think we just have to think about it. My big concern on this one would be, it sounds like there are some moving parts in there. And are we going to be in a situation with only 2 meetings between now and annual town meeting? You know, as Judy said, if the bylaw is written correctly, well, do we feel confident that we're going to be at that point between now and annual town meeting? And if this is important enough, do we maybe have some more meetings between now and then to get this thing done? Because this sounds really important. I know that there are people that express dismay at the type of businesses that may be coming in. And it may be that those are the types of businesses that feel comfortable working with us, and we need to change that. So this sounds very important to me.
Jeremy, your thoughts?
Thanks, Chaz. You know, I think everybody pointed out some key points. Bob talked about what is the history. I think Chaz kind of hit it on the head, where I've only been in town for 13 plus years, that I don't know the whole history behind the strip club and why things like that happen. But looking at the history about why we are where we are, what differs from our neighboring communities. I mean, the strip club is a big one because I think that probably left a lot of people with a sour taste in their mouth about how do we deal with this situation and get more control into the public's hands rather than anything written in a bylaw and leave it to that control. I think that's probably why we're here, but I don't know. But I think the history is a big component. Bob also pointed out making things efficient and friendly. When you talk to everybody in the community, I don't think many people would deny that we want to welcome in more businesses here. We want to diversify our tax base. We want to bring in that portion so it's not a burden to our residents. So getting that to work more efficiently makes plenty of sense to me. But all those have been the things that have jumped out to me. And like I said, I want to just talk about me being 10 to 15 years here. I think Chaz probably and Eric and Joe, everybody in the room has a lot more experience in the history of it than I do. And I'd like to speak to that because that's ultimately what's going to be brought up in a town meeting. And if we do have any kickback on this. So thanks, Chaz.
All right, Larry, your turn. You're muted, buddy. There you
Okay,
go.
I'm sorry. You can hear me now.
Yes, yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. So I moved here in 1994, and I think that is right about the time when the strip club opened or very shortly thereafter. And I actually remember going to these meetings because everybody was like, you have to go to these meetings to help get the strip club shut down. And I remember thinking, well, if this is such a big problem, what the heck did they allow the thing into town in the first place then? It like the whole thing seemed really weird to me. So I remember and understand what a problem that whole situation was. That being said, it is, in my opinion, a really good thing for Tyngsborough to be as friendly as we can to business in general. Anything we can do to simplify processes or make it easier is better. And and just the idea that was mentioned of having some triggers like hours of operation, for example, seems to be a really smart, really good, really obvious one, where just a few things can easily identify businesses that are more likely to create an issue with people. It seems like with a few of these triggers, we can have the process be really simple and have the special permitting process not required for the majority of businesses, which I would think would be ultimately good for everybody.
Thank you. Bob, do you have some examples from other towns that have site plan reviews that seem to be working? Could share with us?
If I could, just before I answer that question, Chaz, just one more aspect of when towns go through this kind of process and look at the table of uses, and Judy's going to be looking at the table of uses anyway, but if you're specifically looking at the table of uses that you have now for what should remain special permits and what might be able to go under the site plan review procedure. One of the things that towns often find is there are uses in the table that have been there forever and probably should not be allowed in the town today. And so you might end up finding some uses that you take out, make it a prohibited use. So it's a mix of things. Sometimes it's not just site plan or special permit. Sometimes it's whether you allow it or not.
Yeah.
And so it's just something to keep in mind as we go through and start looking at the table of uses as to, okay, as of 2023, what does the town of Tyngsborough want to allow in its zoning bylaw? Yeah.
Good point. Eric, you got your.
Yeah, I just want to ensure that the conversation is headed I guess, in the right direction. And I'll defer to Bob and Judy, but when I hear the way the conversation's going, it's almost like the conversation has skipped all the way down to item 4 in terms of the table of uses. What uses do we have? What should be allowed? What shouldn't? And it's less about the procedural separation of the special permit process and the site plan review. I mean, Bob and Judy, do you feel like it is implementable to separate the two processes without a single change to the table of uses?
Well, you have to decide what uses are going to be just site plan review uses and what uses are going to be special permit uses. So you have
This
to
is
look at
true.
the table
This
of
is true.
uses.
Okay.
So what would happen, separate from that is if you focus on, quote, just changing site plan review, which I happen to just have gone through this in another town. I can tell you it was 7 drafts, but anyway, even without touching the table of uses, it's whatever you have now that is allowed as a right. The site plan bylaw is going to define thresholds or uses that are going to trigger site plan review anyway. If it requires a special permit, it doesn't need to go through the site plan review process because it's going to go through the special permit anyway. And through the special permit, the site plan will be reviewed.
Right.
So you could do the site plan review cleanup and then tackle the table of uses. I do agree with Bob, however, it is this sort of iterative thing. Ideally, you're looking at the table of uses and saying, well, if we're going to treat something as site plan review permitted as a right, what would those uses be? And that can sometimes help you think about how you write that site plan bylaw.
Thank you.
So iterative is great, but I just want you to know you can rewrite the site plan bylaw first and tackle the table of uses next. It's imperfect, but it can be done.
Well, it
In my
sounds to me like they're both so intertwined that it's going to be difficult to do one without fixing the other. It almost seems like the two things should happen at the same time.
Ideally, I think so.
Okay.
But I just want to be fair. If there's a need to, there is a need to address site plan review. It's one of the things that I think jumped out at us when we looked at your bylaw. I don't want to take away from the idea that fixing that site plan review bylaw on its own is a good thing to do. For I think the reasons that Eric may have been trying to get at, which is just to have a procedural basis for looking at a use that is permitted as of right. If it's going to trigger site plan review, how are you going to do that?
Exactly.
Okay. So I guess that brings us back to the original question of, are there any examples of other towns that have a very strict and site plan review that seems to be working well for those towns that we could sort of model something after?
I do have a list. I thought I had it with me, but apparently it's in another file.
Was that
and-
something you could share with Eric and he can distribute it out to us?
Yeah,
We'll be getting together in a couple of weeks here and we can sort of go through that after we've had a chance to digest it a little bit. I'm sure we'll have plenty of questions. But maybe that might help facilitate what we're trying to accomplish here and so forth. I mean, all the questions that you had at the end, they're all very, very good questions that I don't necessarily have an answer to, but if other towns have answered those questions in a way that seems to be working, then I think that's something that we would certainly want to look at and move forward with.
one thing I will say in response to, I forgot who mentioned this, what are some of the other towns around you doing with site plan review? And I haven't looked at all the towns around you, but well, maybe Judy, this is more Judy's, well, Judy and I will discuss this, but taking a look at what's going on around you and seeing if there's any good examples of towns that have a site plan review. I mean, the towns that come to mind immediately are towns like Reading and where I was, Amherst, and I don't know, Judy, you probably have some.
Just rewrote Tewksbury's. I mean,
Tewksbury,
Tewksbury's got a new
Mansfield.
site plan bylaw.
But we can, Judy and I will put together a list for you with a link. Well, I've got links on my list that you can just click on and go look at them.
Yeah, I think that'd be helpful, Eric.
Another quick question. So in terms of like moving forward and evaluating those, well, I think the information that you'll be providing, that sort of help set up the examples for procedural elements makes sense. In terms of trying to facilitate an evaluation for the committee for uses in the table that I guess are intertwined with the special permit and site plan review process, is it fair to say that if we isolated the uses that currently require or list a requirement for a site plan review, to focus on those first and then have the committee set up some sort of spreadsheet or a survey or something else that let the committee say, out of all these uses that currently require not just a special permit, but also trigger site plan review, do you agree or disagree, or like on a scale of 1 to 5, how important do you think it is that it should remain a special permit as well? Or should it be remain only a site plan review process? If somebody feels like, or the group or Bob and Judy think that that's important, I can help put a tool like that together so that people can evaluate and see them all at once and then sort of voice their opinions about which ones are like quote unquote a threat or need more oversight, and which ones you'd say, well, if we had site plan review, that'd be enough.
I think that's a good idea, Eric. I would also say, though, if they can see a couple of examples of well done functional site plan bylaws, I think it makes it.
Oh yeah, all together.
Okay,
Just
that
separate
use
process.
really, yeah. I mean, but I think just being able to see, well, what does site plan actually do for these other communities where it's working well?
Mhm.
And it's uncoupled from the special permit. I think if they can see that, in some ways, it makes it easier to go into this table of uses. I mean, there's more to talk about with the table of uses than this, but I think this is pretty fundamental.
I mean, there's a possibility that we might be able to get somebody from the Tewksbury Planning Board. I can talk to Steve and ask if there's anybody that, makes sense to have them join or connect to the Tyngsborough Zoning Review Committee meeting for 10 minutes to answer questions or at least provide some insight on how that's working in their community. At the very least, it might make sense to try to ask and see if there's somebody available that you can talk to.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
do think, that what you just suggested, Eric, is kind of a first cut that might, get people thinking about, is this use, so potentially onerous, we should keep it as a special permit, or is this use a normal, regular use that goes in business districts? And just to get, everybody thinking in those terms and making some quick early decisions.
Mr. Chair, if I might.
Yeah.
A couple questions. So, I mean, I'm sure there are plenty of towns that have good bylaws and have some of the similar type of history, maybe not with a strip club, but other types of businesses. The Cape Cod and those towns certainly are able to control the character. Many of them are able to control the character. But I don't know, Eric, if NEMCOG or MMA or any of the associations that we have, I'm sure there may be some people that we can tap into there to help facilitate that. But it does sound like, so Bob in the memo outlined some key questions that we want to ask as far as what's important. And you started talking about some examples. It seems to me that it would be good to have the planning board and, ZBA to maybe have those discussions as a group. I know we can do that from a Board of Selectmen standpoint, but I don't think we're not dealing with that stuff on a day-to-day basis. I think it would be important to have the larger planning board to perhaps have some of those discussions as a group, because that would be very helpful to us. Because I know, we have people that participate, but it's a small sample, and I know that there's some historical things that we might want to look at as well. So it seems like we've got multiple homework assignments, if you will, to try to better understand, what this might look like and how we might do it.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with you, Eric, that, once those materials are available from Bob and Judy, from a procedural perspective, it certainly makes sense to get feedback from the rest of the board, and the representatives that are here on the zoning review committee can be responsible for sort of soliciting the feedback from that group. I'll try to make myself available to as many of those meetings as I can. I'll certainly be there for the planning board. And we can do the same thing with that board. if and when a list that isolates the uses that currently require a site plan review, I think that's where I thought you were going with the conversation. You know, I think having them weigh in on those elements would be good too.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, if I may, Eric is a great point. I mean, if we have somebody that like Middlesex 3 that comes in and just talks to the planning board, at least we can get a little niche of how the rest of the board is feeling about what's happening up and down that area, because they know that corridor pretty well, and what those communities are doing. If we can just get a little bit of a bite of what they know, I think we can come back to here and let you guys know what the rest of the board is saying. I mean, it doesn't have to be a terribly long conversation with somebody like that, but at least we can understand our communities that are our neighboring communities a lot better and a lot quicker. And you're dealing
I'm
with
just
it
not
on
sure. So NIMCOG serves a purpose with regards to providing regional planning in general, but their intimate knowledge of the table of uses or their procedures for each individual community might not be as strong as you might be anticipating. So while I'm sure that they would volunteer time to come speak to this committee, I'm just not sure if they're going to be offering like detailed insights that you might be looking for.
So for whatever it's worth, there is a wonderful committee member in Tewksbury who might be very good for you guys to talk to, and it's Todd Johnson. Who, Bob, you probably remember Todd. He was
Yeah.
on the select board, and I mean, he can sort of tell you, you know, a little bit about what they did, but why they made some of the changes to site plan review that they made. And I think they probably went a lot further than you would want to go in terms of how they approached some uses, but I think he can certainly tell you why they did what they did and why site plan review as an independent procedure uncoupled from the special permit is so important.
Right, and at least in that case, you'd be talking to another peer who's a member of their community, as opposed to somebody who works with NIMCOG might live in Brookline, they might live, you know, who knows where, Newburyport. You're kind of getting filtered information through the professional planners. I mean, I'm one of them, I guess. But I think it would be helpful for you to get insights from folks that are serving their communities the same way that you are.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Bob, go ahead.
One other thing, just to just kind of put in up in your brain cells while you're going through this, is in my report, I had a table of the kinds of topics that towns address in their standards and criteria when they adopt. Now, this is a fairly long list, but it's not all inclusive. And as you're thinking about this, what are the important issues you'd want to have control over in the sense that you'd want to have standards and that you can impose conditions? And because that, as Judy and I will keep saying, it's all in the criteria and the regulations that decide whether you've got a good site plan review or not.
Right.
So as we would move forward with some sort of a document, oh, there we go, okay. We could incorporate some of these things into it so that anybody who wants to just do a site plan review would say, okay, here are the answers, here are the questions that you're gonna have to answer. And this is the criteria you're gonna have to come up with in any discussion of at the site plan review level. And it would go further because there would also a bunch of documentation and so forth too that we would want from just for a site plan review, and it would not be as, you know, as voluminous as it would be for a special permit. Is that sort of the way I'm reading this?
So the best thing you can do for your applicant is prepare a application for site plan review that doubles with your bylaw, that lays out exactly what the board needs in order to be able for the applicant to address these criteria. And make the application fit the bylaw. It will save you so many headaches. It will save the applicant so many headaches if you tell them exactly what you need in order to be able to address whatever the criteria are that are going to be in your bylaw. I just routinely do that now. I've just discovered so many times where a bylaw gets fixed, it gets updated, but then the application forms are still just as innocuous, just as uninformative as they were in the first place, and the applicants don't necessarily understand what the board wants. So good sufficient requirements make a big difference. And that doesn't all need to be in the bylaw, but it should be in your rules and regulations.
Okay. This gets deeper and deeper the more we talk about it.
Yeah, but a good body of regulation works that way. The zoning bylaw establishes the authority for site plan review, that the procedures for it and the sort of overarching basis for the board's decision, and then the submission requirements in rules and regulations are administrative. So if you decide you need 11 copies instead of 13, you're just fixing your regs and not going back to town meeting for something that's just a silly change.
Right, it's not, I don't think it's too overwhelming, Chaz. It fits into the existing,
Yeah.
it fits into the existing structure that the planning board already has, and it's probably iterative improvements that you'd be making to the regulations. And as Judy pointed out, if you're making a procedural and general change to the zoning bylaws, you don't have to go back to town meeting for the planning board to define what it wants in its rules and regulations.
Right, so they're two
Just like you do
separate
in an
issues.
open meeting.
We would just get the bylaw updated or fixed or established better. And then the criteria for the applicant would not be included in that type of that wouldn't have to go before town meeting. Is that what I'm hearing then?
I think so.
The bylaw would go to town meeting, but the rules and regulations are adopted by the planning board.
Okay, that was my question. Okay. All right, so I guess at this point, Bob, you'll get us some stuff to look at. Eric, you'll get us some sort of a table of uses with some things that we should be taking a look at.
Yep, isolating the items that are listed as site plan review with some
And-
instructions.
At the same time, would it make sense to be looking at who the site plan review would go to? In that, I know that there's an awful lot of stuff that goes to the Board of Selectmen. And there's been some stuff that really kind of goes to them as almost to be the special permit granting authority. And I think there are some things on there that really there, and Eric Eldridge, you can speak to this too, but we've had a couple of things that have come through, the car lot dealership, the car wash. You know, in speaking to other members of the Board of Selectmen, I think that they were kind of uncomfortable having to be the special permit granting authority for those. Is that something else that you think at this point, Judy, we should be taking a look at to move those over to the planning board at this point in time, or wait until we have a bigger review of the table of uses?
I think it's best to equip one board with the expertise to do that kind of review. Splintering it almost guarantees inconsistency in the way it's applied. Site plan review, my opinion is the planning board should be the site plan review authority.
Yeah, I think site plan definitely should be in the planning board. The special permit, we want to move more stuff out of special permit and move it into site plan review. So it might be that the special permits can stay with the select board, but the site plan review, because we're going to have more stuff, stays with the planning board. If we're going to switch them both and have special permits, I think that's going to be a tougher one, right? Because we're going to have to sit there and say, oh, gee, I want to, it's more of a change. So
So
when I
just-
look,
Just
yeah, go
means
ahead, Judy.
you're still gonna have the select board doing site plan review because you're gonna be doing it as part of the special permit. You're not gonna send somebody to the planning board for site plan review if the Board of Selectmen's doing special permit, right?
But we want to have fewer things with requiring special permit, correct?
Right.
Right, that's what I'm talking about. I'm sitting there saying, because right now, the way it is, the Board of Selectmen does special permits for buildings and things like that. And we typically will ask for the planning board's assessment of the situation. And we'd want to have fewer things going through special permit and going through the Board of Selectmen. If we want to say all special permits are going to be approved by planning board because they're going to do site plan review at the same time, that might be a little bit more involved as far as getting all those changes done and having the town feel comfortable with that. I don't know, because I haven't seen, what all the changes are going to be on that.
Let me give us some good examples. Two of them are ones that are related to either alcohol or cannabis. So for special permits for those types of businesses, because the select board is so closely involved with either the host community agreement or the liquor licenses, I mean, at least since Tyngsborough is the community that my planning experience is limited to, it does make sense that the special permits remain with the select board in that regard. Some of those businesses are going to require site plan review. So I guess I'm looking for feedback from Judy and Bob. Judy looks perplexed, but if that special permit authority remains with the select board, could the site plan review be deferred or still be performed by the planning board if the special permit is issued by the select board?
I think the whole point is to uncouple site plan review from the special permit.
Okay.
So you don't want to
So
be
maybe-
sending somebody to the select board for a special permit for use and to the planning board for site plan review. That defeats
Okay.
the purpose. So if the select board is the special permit granting authority for a use, they should be looking at the site plan as part of that permit. It doesn't go to the planning board at all. They can ask the planning board as a reviewing party for comments. Planning board can be a technical review body, I suppose, but I mean, don't make people go in more than one direction. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, so what
Actually,
happens, and I mentioned this before, maybe I didn't mention it. So a lot of towns, their special permit standards and criteria are decades old and not very clear or not up to date. And then in the last 10 years or so, they've adopted site plan review with really good up-to-date standards, comprehensive standards. And use goes through the site plan review process, and it comes out looking a whole lot better than a use that goes through the special permit process because the standards are different. So one of the things to think about is if you create this standalone site plan review process, some of those criteria and conditions, if you don't have them for the special permit process, and you really need to have them for the special permit, you have some of those standards and criteria apply to both procedures.
Right.
So like Judy said, you don't want to make somebody go through two processes. That's the main point.
Right.
You have site plan review with their standards and conditions and special permit with their standards, many of which overlap.
all right, I'm coming
Yeah.
around. I do want to withdraw my one comment, which is the special permit process for cannabis businesses is with the planning board, not the select board. The
Okay,
select board
that's
does give the HCA, sorry.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
Well, I see, like we were just discussing, overlap, but I see it in a number of ways building up so that we're looking at criteria that would no longer need a site plan review. It would be a building permit issued for that particular zone, but getting into more difficult situations, you would then have a site plan review, and that would be going through the planning board. But I'd still see a need for that site plan review to be submitted to the Board of Selectmen for special permits on their part, because they may not be familiar with all of the criteria and all of the rules and regulations and all of the historical facts that the planning board is very familiar with. And they will need that information fed to them so that they can make an accurate decision.
Well, there's a plan submitted with the special permit.
That would be a special plan from the planning board review that would be submitted to the selectmen. That's right, that's correct. So that they could review all the data. We wouldn't be relying solely on putting that on the shoulders of the selectmen to make that decision. They need that information from one of these SPRs.
So currently, the Board of Selectmen reaches out to all the committees for comment,
Sure.
which
That's
for-
very superficial, though.
I
It's very-
agree. And
Very
that's,
superficial.
that's where I'm going with this, is that we need to have a little more input. And I'm not sure whether you would need approval from the planning board or something beyond just a recommendation or a comment. That's what you're saying, right, Joe?
I would say that it builds up from least to most. And in the most dire situation that has to go before the Board of Selectmen for a special permit, they're going to need as much information as possible. And that would require a site plan review, recommendations from all boards. Yeah. I don't see it being totally disassociated. The special permit and the site plan review.
So ultimately, I would think that it would be better to look at what the select board is actually reviewing, either as a site plan review or a special permit, and decide whether that really belongs in their lap, or whether it would be better served to have it go to the planning board and let the planning board decide on it.
So
Right.
doesn't this fall into almost, you get your table of uses and how these things are being done, and do they require a special permit, or do they just require a site plan review? And the way I look at it is I think we'd have to look at the specific instances. I'm sure there are plenty of instances that we can all say, you know what, this shouldn't require a special permit from the Board of Selectmen. But there may be others that we sit there and say, you know what, that really does need to go to the select board and get their approval. I think just like we were talking about with the bylaws and what we have to look and see some specific examples and be able to determine, yeah, that makes sense to me. To sit there and say that everything would then go to the planning board for a special permit, I think that would be a huge jump without us going through everything and making sure that we're there. I think either way, there's a lot of things that require special permit right now that shouldn't require a special permit, whether it's from the select board or the planning board. And I think that, we want to, if it were me, I would sit there and say, let's tackle that first. That probably gives us the best bang for our buck. And then we can sit there and say, all right, who's going to grant whatever's left over? Who's the best group to ultimately grant that permit? Is that planning board? Is that, select board? Depending upon what's left, I think we can look at that and make a determination.
All right, so I think this brings us back to what we want to focus on for town meeting. And the discussion, we haven't talked about the signs, and we haven't talked about the split zone parcels. But just based on the conversation that we're having here tonight, I think that our focus really should be on the special permits, site plan review, and our table and our existing table of uses. I know, Judy, you've got a bunch of other things that you wanted to add or take a look at that you don't have the time to do. I understand that. So maybe that, again, we should focus on what we have right now and try and sort through that and have that be the focus for May. Does that make sense to everyone, or am I heading off on the wrong course here?
I think if you want to focus just on right now, what you have as a table of uses and correlate site plan review with how you're gonna make that work, I think that's fine. I just think the table of uses itself needs a lot of discussion. So it isn't just a question of my time, it's like the discussion that needs to take place. You've got uses that aren't there, you've got uses that uses that seem to have the same kind of requirements across the board in all districts, and I'm wondering why aren't they merged? Why are they separate? There's just a lot of stuff that I think needs discussion, but you don't have to do that in order to fix site plan review.
Okay.
I have one burning
Yep.
question for Bob and Judy, Chaz.
Yep, please.
So in communities that you feel like have already evaluated or gone through this process well, do you see examples when the select board is the special permit granting authority and you feel like it makes sense?
Just speaking for me, I've never worked with a community that had special permits go to the select board.
Okay. Judy, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I mean, I have seen it a couple of times and I've just heard a lot of complaints from applicants about it. And concerns from staff about inconsistency.
Thank you.
All right, so I guess then we really should look at our table of uses that exists now and see what we can clean up there first. Judy, just off the top of your head, are there any things that, looking at our table of uses that jump out at you and saying, well, you're really missing this one, you need that one? Anything like that that we should be looking at just as part of our conversation? Or is it just the inconsistency that bothers you about it, or things that you would want to add? Or
Well, for starters, I think it needs to be reorganized. I mean, there's reasons to kind of group uses in a way that might make it a little easier to separate out what's a special permit and what doesn't need to be. You've got stuff in here that I don't understand, and maybe you know exactly why it is the way it is. But on I was just looking at this a minute ago on the commercial government, institutional and public service uses. You have the same requirements for assisted living and continuing care campus, where the districts where they're prohibited, the districts where they require a special permit. And I'm just wondering, like, well, why not think about having a comprehensive section here on senior residential uses instead of having two entries? Why do you need two entries on the table? I just don't get it. So those are the kinds of questions I find myself asking.
I can answer that question. I mean, I can see the point of potentially having them grouped together in a separate portion of the table that is related to like age-specific uses, but the reason why they're listed out separately as separate line items is a continuing care campus is a different definition than assisted living. They're not identical.
Right. But you could have, you know, senior residential uses.
Okay.
One row, right?
Yeah.
And in the special residential regulations section of the bylaw, you lay out, this is what senior residential uses means. And so
I see. It
might do
consolidates some information. Doesn't really change the implementation of it, just
it just
cleans
makes
up
the table.
Yeah, okay.
You know, you've got language in here, as I recall, if I'm not mistaken. You know, heavy manufacturing, heavy industrial versus light. That's really old language. That stuff kind of needs to be updated. So there are things like that, I guess. Some of these terms are just not all that clear. I think there's like waste recovery, waste transfer. I mean, I understand those are terms of art, but I think that some of the terminology in this table could be cleaned up. So.
And some uses jump out, just say, I mean, are you ever going to have these uses like a zoo? Are you expecting to have a zoo in Tyngsborough? Or, I don't know, is there a rifle range in Tyngsborough?
Oh, there is.
Yes, and there was
Okay.
a zoo in the next town over, so some of these things, you'll be surprised.
Yeah, I understand that, but you know, some of them you just, you know, those would be questions we would have.
Yeah.
Because we don't know.
Right.
You know, but, you know, I just dealt with a town that still had a use of ice cutting. You know, cutting the pond, right? It was from the 30s. They hadn't done any ice cutting in a long while, and then nobody's going to be doing ice cutting in the next decade. So,
No
so
sentimentality in the planning industry.
yeah.
no ice to cut right now. So,
So
yeah.
most of these look
Point
good.
well taken. I see exactly where you're coming from with that. So I guess my thought on the subject would be, let's work with what we have. Let's take a look at that and see if there's some things that we can straighten out. At the same time, we'll look at some surrounding towns that have language and so forth in place for special permit reviews and, I mean, site plan reviews and special permit and where the breakdown is on those. And I think we can hopefully come up with something for town meeting that, but when I don't know if it was you, Judy, or Bob, who said it could take 7 rewrites to get this thing right. Well, I don't see us having 7 rewrites between now and May 2nd. So,
Tyngsborough's better than that.
but I want to be able to present something at town meeting so that we can at least, you know, roll this thing a little bit further on down the road. So,
Every town has different issues going on. That's all I'm going to say.
of course. So,
That happened to be a community that had a tremendous controversy going on about a daycare center, so. Anyway,
we like those.
they
Well,
do
you
too,
can
but they're
require
not-
them all to be special permit.
yeah. so. Anyway,
All right, so is the committee all right with just focusing on these 2 issues right now? And we'll put the signs on the back burner and we'll put the split zone parcels on the back burner for now. Eric, I know these are priorities that you have. We did do some sign work at our last town meeting. So at least the town's aware we're trying to move that forward. Would you be terribly disappointed if we did not try and get something together for our next town meeting in May? Or
Well, I guess I'd be disappointed if we didn't come up with any work, you know, before May with regards to progress and discussions. I can understand why you might not be able to finish the work for a presentation of a finalized amendment to submit on the warrant, but I think postponing the work until after May, I don't know, I just feel like we probably want to be trying to address some of it, even if the goal is not to have it ready by May 9th. I'd like to see the sign work to be started during this cycle. And I would request that you as the chair, I do have the map of the split zone parcels. As Bob mentioned, it could be low-hanging fruit in terms of what the committee and the community itself wants to use to address it. You know, you and I talked about that briefly today, Chaz, about, well, what are some different things that we can do and what are the special considerations there? I'm hoping that we've only been chatting for 1 hour and 15 minutes tonight. If we can address that issue, I think it's something that could be incorporated into this cycle. And at the very least, or at the very worst, I should say, the committee goes through a process, comes up with a consensus, but for whatever reason, either the community, the rest of the select board, the planning board, some members of the ZBA, who knows what, if there's enough people who say, well, we're really not comfortable with what the committee's come up with as far as a recommendation is concerned, and it doesn't make its way onto the warrant for town meeting, you know, the committee goes back to the drawing board and tries to address whatever concerns the community has. But considering it's a very, like, I don't want to say cut and dry, but I mean, it's a very specific issue. You come up to a location, you have a parcel that's zoned in 2 different ways. How are you going to address it? So while there might be some opinions about it, the issue doesn't go away by not addressing it. And it still seems like something that the committee can come up with an advisable solution that the community can decide whether or not to move forward with.
okay, Joe?
Sure. And there were 7 good examples that were handed out. So I believe that we've got actually a little bit of a jump up on this one. We can review those 7 examples, see what we like, dislike, maybe make a hybrid situation, and then make a recommendation back to Barrett Planning.
Yeah.
Okay. So Bob, you had given us a bunch of local examples. And most of it seems to be, to me anyway, sort of drawing lines within or setbacks or encroachment into a different zone. Could you just sort of summarize that for us?
So, sure. The issue is you have a lot, it's zoned in 2 different districts. one of the districts is at a higher density, however you want to define that, it's commercial versus residential, or it's commercial residential that allows more housing in the front, and a lower density residential in the back, or the front property has less restrictive dimensional requirements, maybe allows things higher and wider and taller and all of that than the back. The question is usually, but as you'll see in this, it's sometimes the reverse, is the town willing to allow the higher density use to encroach into the lower density portion of the lot in any manner? And as you can see here, it's kind of I think this is a historical cut and paste. Towns, somebody a long time ago said, sure, they can encroach in up to 30 feet. And then, over the years, towns said, oh, that's we'll use that. So you see a lot of them like that. In other towns, and you see different distances. I've seen 50 feet or whatever, but whatever. And that's it. Now, some towns just prohibit it. You do the higher density zoning on the higher density parcel, and you do the lower density project on the lower density parcel. That's it, There's no encroachment one way or the other. But as you can see from some of these in Needham and some of these others here, actually looked at it from both angles.
Right.
So not only encroaching from the higher density to the lower density, but could the lower density development encroach into the higher density portion of the lot? That's a second angle to it that a lot of towns don't address, but some do. And then there's a couple of examples here where they said, well, wait a minute, if more than 50% of the whole property is in the lower density district, then the whole property has to abide by the lower density district. Or if 50 or 60% of the property is in the higher density district, then the higher density development can happen throughout the whole property. So this sort of, how do you look at that dividing line between the two districts? Can it move? How much can it move? And which way can it move? So it can be as simple as just having a simple, well, the higher density can go 30 feet into the lower density or 50 feet or whatever, and be done with it. If you want to get more elaborate, there are examples here on how to get more elaborate.
Eric Schlano, to you. My recollection from the master plan was that a lot of these lots are on Middlesex, and it's commercial up front and industrial in the back. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Sure, we can take a look at it. Am I muted?
Nope.
So I have a map here. A lot of them are up and down the Middlesex Road corridor, but as Bob mentioned, and I mentioned earlier today, there are residential examples, particularly up around Muscuppick Lake. So the sections that are highlighted in yellow have parcels that are affected by split zone. I've noticed them particularly in my use when I've got questions and what people want to be able to do with their property in the area that is the easternmost component above Muscuppick Lake, where there's a small business district, B1. Some of those parcels are B1 and then B1 and R2 split zone. Anyhow, in terms of answering your question about how to deal with it, it's possible, based on the conversations I've had with members of the community, that Tyngsborough comes up with a solution that decides to address residential split zone parcels differently or explicitly from the way they address split zone parcels that are between, non-residential uses. And I think that would be helpful in that I don't think a blanket statement about, more or less density or more or less restrictive zoning requirements should be blanketed across every type of use. I think it requires just a little bit of nuance, but I think if you isolated the evaluation between residential comparisons and commercial comparisons, that would be good. You do have a couple of examples, as I mentioned, where you have residential commercial split zone, and I guess you'll, as a committee, have to determine how to cover that. Does that help, Chas? Is that what you're looking for?
That does help. And I guess I would agree with you that we should separate it between business and residential whenever that's possible. So I guess that I would go back to Bob and say, would we come up with something, or are other towns doing that as well, where they're sort of going, okay, here's commercial, here's industrial, here's residential, and having really two separate bylaws to cover this.
Well, Bedford on the memo is one example of that. They have residential split districts, and then in all other they just have a blanket in all other districts, presumably, commercial, business, industrial, that are split zone. They have, so they've done it that way. I did not come, there's probably others out there. I haven't come across any yet, but so, and it really comes down to what is it you want to allow or not allow? Do you want to allow commercial uses to extend into industrial zones or not? Do you want to allow, I'm not clear on the residential split zones. Are they two different residential zones, or a business zone and a residential zone?
You have both. So
Okay.
around Muscuppick, you have two different residential zones. You've got, I believe there, it's like I don't know why so many of I guess you have some R1, R2 scenarios that are split. So you've got two residential districts there. And then there's a couple that are harder to see. I can zoom in more, where you have some parcels that are split between a business district and a residential district. I think that there's going to be a combination of ways that the committee is going to recommend addressing these issues. It's possible that a cleaner solution for some of these would be to identify only one district that these parcels belong to. But as I mentioned to Chaz, some property owners and or neighborhood owners might have a real problem with that. You take one parcel and you decide that it makes sense for it to be, the business district, and the whole thing is business zone, and that's the end of it. And then another parcel is, now you decided that it's going to be residential, and they're upset because they say it decreased the value of their property. So it is a complicated issue to address there. But if it's
Well, let me ask, what do you do now? Do you treat this as you can only do the higher density zoning in the higher density portion? I mean, how does the town address this now?
I mean, I'll let the rest of the community members chime in, and Joe probably can explain that a little bit as well. The town essentially brings rezoning to town meeting to decide and approve changes to either the zoning map, like if somebody's proposing an industrial use on a portion of a parcel that's zoned, the business district, they get a special permit to either change the boundaries of where the industrial business district line is, in order to basically evaluate, the town meeting essentially evaluates a specific use proposal on how a parcel should be zoned. But I'll let other folks maybe elaborate on that.
Joe, go ahead, please.
Mr. Chair, well, one of the criteria would be that would be written into the regulation would probably be pre-existing conditions. So if you had vacant lots, that would be considered in one criteria. But if you had somebody living on a lot next door to someone that now they wanted to buy the house and maybe take it down and expand their business or whatever, or combine the lots, I don't even know if that's possible. We did have a situation between two communities, that was Dracut and Tyngsborough, at an area of Long Pond where there was actually a commercial business that they wanted to take down, remove, and the lot line, the town lines went right through the lot, and they were gonna put in a residential condo complex or area in a residential neighborhood. That was very going back and forth. Actually, the applicants had to go to 2 communities and multiple meetings. So it can get very complicated, but I would see that we would have to have a pre-existing condition on adjacent lots so that we would allay the fears of neighboring residents to actually having their property values being decreased.
Yeah, this is a tough one. I mean, even as we look at this map, the way you've got it up right now, Eric, and if we were to say, okay, whichever the biggest use is, that would be the one that would be used. If there was businesses that wanted to go in, let's say on around Locust Pond, for example, it's 1243. Now I know that's probably not the best example, but you've got some business use in the front of it, but yet most of it is industrial.
Right.
So would you not allow a business to go in there on Middlesex because the majority of that lot is industrial? So this is a tough one.
I mean, if it helps with the perspective for Judy and Bob, I mean, the point, and it's probably obvious, I mean, the point of how we got here was so that the town can provide the potential for development of as many uses as possible without sacrificing the obvious commercial and retail opportunities that are along its commercial corridor, which is Middlesex Road. Because the town has such large parcels, you know, you could easily facilitate, and this is what the town has already, they've already permitted a project to do this, to have an industrial use set back behind the retail commercial space along Middlesex Road. So the zoning that's there has resulted in real development of different types of uses. But by identifying those parcels as one zone or not that, or a different zone, might have prevented either one.
But you probably don't want to lose that kind of flexibility. You want to, you know, be able to put industrial uses in the back.
But again, you're only limiting to the amount of penetration into the adjoining lot. You have to remember that. It's not like they're going to be taking over the remaining split lot. You could actually go, like you were saying on your examples, you had 30 feet or 50 feet, or you could do a percentage of the total, right?
But it doesn't have anything to do with the adjoining lots though, Joe.
No, it's just the split lot, how much they would go into the
Area of their own land.
the area of their own land,
Right.
but that is zoned differently than what they're currently doing.
Correct. So if I was taking minutes, Joe, I was gonna write down that you were suggesting that the committee consider pre-existing conditions on adjacent lots when making a choice. I mean, is that correct?
Yes, especially in a residential neighborhood.
Okay.
You might even need 3 tiers, a lot that's split between 2 residential zones, a lot that's split between a business and a residential zone, and a lot that's split between a business and an industrial zone. Because it's very, I mean, what you're looking at in Middlesex Road is obviously very different than what you're looking at around the lake.
Yeah. And you can see from this map, we want to have commercial retail on Middlesex Road, and we want to have industrial behind that. But it's destroyed. It split those lots up to the point where every single one of them has to be addressed. And it's not easy to do that because some of those parcels that are split in all sorts of different percentages. So to try and come up with some sort of a blanket, here's the new rule, it's difficult to try and do that.
Does the discussion here, though, I'm sorry, if I have a chance to interject, Mr. Chair, for a sec.
Please, yeah, go ahead.
Does the conversation about the prioritization, meaning that the reason why we have this is primarily, at least my observation, is primarily to protect the retail corridor itself. So if that is the real objective, does that help the committee identify what takes precedence? Meaning, as Bob's explaining, you could have one use encroach on the other, or go the reverse way. You could, when you're looking at this particular section of town, at the very least, to start, you could say, well, we want to prioritize the commercial retail, so that can encroach into the industrial area. But no matter how good the opportunity is, or what the tax revenue would be, we don't want to see the industrial district encroach on the retail district, only because we think that's going to prohibit future development opportunity or the existing businesses that are there. I'm not saying I recommend one over the other. I'm just saying that it seems like the committee and the community is prioritizing the commercial retail components. And does that help guide you with regards to language and a potential solution that uses at least the framework of one of those examples from Bob as a starting point, particularly in the relationship between commercial and industrial? We'll address the other ones later.
I think you're absolutely right, Eric. That's exactly what whoever put this together, I think that's exactly what they wanted to do. And I think that's something that we want to maintain. I mean, I don't think we want a 400,000 square foot warehouse on Middlesex Road.
Right, but you don't want to lose the opportunity for a proposal as such if it's far enough away from that corridor.
Absolutely.
There you go.
So given that this was like second on the recommendations in the master plan, and it doesn't sound like we have to tackle all the residential implications. Could we just focus in on the business and the industrial component as it relates? I mean, theoretically, it focuses in on Middlesex Road, but could we just address that one issue and look to say that's what we'd want to tackle for town meeting? It doesn't seem like that one seems to be a little bit easier for us to make some decisions. It seems like there's far fewer decisions that would need to be made, and would have a lot less impact than some of the other things that we were talking about earlier today. But is that feasible?
I think once you have language or consensus on how to address the commercial or the B3 districts and the I1 districts, it's not going to be a huge leap to go say, well, what are the other examples, and can we come up with language to address at least another portion of the others? I mean, I think that's the right place to start because it's the most difficult one to deal with.
I just know the residential ones, depending upon what we want to do there, it could be smaller, it could be a big one. Do we need to tackle all of them? I guess my question is, do we need to tackle all of them in order to realistically go to town meeting with it? And if so, is there an easier way to do that without, I mean, the residential ones, particularly when you start dealing with what's on the water and some of those that I have a feeling that's gonna be a hard one for us to figure out and come to consensus on and have a way that's not gonna negatively impact enough people. I'm wondering if we can separate those two out, because whenever we have big decisions like this, you get enough people who are concerned about one component of the change in the bylaw that they shoot it down. Whereas if we just focused in on the one that 90% of the people were good with, it would get passed. So I'm just looking at it by, where the potential hornet's nests are, and what the reason we want to do this is to address the business side. So if we can focus there, do we think we could get consensus enough to address the issues and get this in front of town meeting?
So we would want to word it that it would be B3 and I1 split lots only rather than, because I think if you can go back up Middlesex again, you've got a lot of red next to yellow. We would not want to include that.
Yeah, I wouldn't get as prescriptive to say specifically B3 and I1. You might just be able to say any business district versus I1. And based on Judy's lack of perplexion in her face, I assume that it means that it is, you agree. I was waiting to hear an answer from you and Bob, but I think that it probably is feasible to go to town meeting and address that relationship between those districts and ignore, at least temporarily, ignore residential split conflicts and address them later.
I don't see any reason why you can't do that.
Great.
I don't either, but I just had a question. The dark red is B3. What color is the salmon color? I mean, what zone is the salmon color?
It's hard to read.
Let me
B3
see.
is
There is a
also
key, and that's a good question.
Yeah, but there was another little couple of places that were marked B3, but there's that salmon color. That's why I'm confused.
I'd have to go back to Carlin asking about that because it's indicating that the salmon is B1.
Right.
But look at Kendall
And
Road.
This is definitely not B1 up and down here.
Mm.
It should really just be all red. I don't know why it's pink.
Okay.
Oh, it might, I know why. Probably because those parcels they look pink because they're the B3 red, right? But they're not split. So when you look carefully at this map, he kind of has zoning districts colored, even if it's not a split zone. So you have to look at things that are full color and they're affected by a split zone. So this 1238 parcel, it has a zoning conflict. But this parcel immediately to the north of it, even though it's quote unquote salmon color, it's a B3 zoned parcel, but it doesn't have a zoning conflict. So it does take a little bit of thought process to understand which parcels have so you see this pink area through the center there. Those are B3 parcels along Middlesex Road they don't have any split in them. They're purely B3. So if there's some other color coding or some other way that you want to see the map, we can try to make one that's adjusted. But that's the explanation.
Thank you.
So what we're talking about would really take care of the west side of Middlesex, but not necessarily the east side. East side is
Residential.
That's true.
B3 and residential bumping into each other. So,
Well, it could be that we address the ones that are anything that's business, right? But I just think you do have some along the water, and I think there's more potential for challenges. I think if we started here, it seems like we could make some inroads. We can understand the pieces better. They're separated so that they can be voted purely on their own merits versus one person likes, they absolutely hate this one provision.
all right, so what we're saying then is we would focus on the business commercial and the industrial and see what we can do with that then, and leave the business and the residential alone for now.
That's what I was saying. I don't know what everybody else thinks.
I'm just trying to make sure that we're all on the same page, because I think that's the easiest, that's the low hanging fruit right there. And we'll figure out what we want to do with the business and residential split at some other time. But if we wanted to do something about the zoning for town meeting, I think that's the easiest one to fix.
yeah, we could draft up something for you to even
Okay.
discuss at the February 7th meeting.
Sure.
Thank you.
Great, okay. Are we all in agreement with that? All right, terrific, all right. And then the other thing we wanted to discuss was the signs. So Eric, what's your thought on that one then?
That is definitely a more comprehensive element that has to be discussed. There's a couple of branches of issues to be addressed there that I think make it more complex. So one is the structure of the sign bylaw regulations, in that it's very repetitive, in that you have to go to each specific district in which you're discussing in order to figure out, well, what are the regulations in this district for the sign bylaw? And then you go to the other district and it's written almost exactly the same, but there's just a couple of nuances that are off. A lot of that could potentially be summarized in a table. There's a way to condense the material so that it's a lot easier for the business community to understand what's allowable, what's not, what the restrictions are, and what sizes they can deal with. And so that's overall the structure. If you did nothing to change the regulations, you could probably make the regulations themselves easier to digest and to read. And then in terms of the content of the bylaw itself, it's missing a lot of the modern signage types. I think the regulating of, like, neon signs and or like internally lit signs and electronic signs, whether they're LEDs or something else, or are they have motion, and it's attempting to try to address some of those, but in a lot of the cases, what it's doing is it's just prohibiting it outright, which is the prerogative of the community, but I don't know if it really meets the business community's needs or the community's wants and preferences. So it's something that would probably require, a lot more community engagement, with, opinions from the public about what they want, what they don't, what do they like, what do they not like. And then hearing from the business community that is asking for things, and some of the community might say, well, I don't really like that, but I didn't know the business community was not demanding it, but so strongly requesting it that, I don't want to stand in their way. So it would be a much more iterative, and various parts of the community would have to weigh in on that. So it's a lot more of a community engagement issue. And I specifically had members of the community asking to participate in those discussions, even with the zoning review committee. So, I have some folks that are looking for, electronic signs that are currently prohibited, that would be designed to inform the public specifically about events at like schools. The schools are actually the biggest entity that's been inquiring with the planning board or the planning department and the administrative office about providing like school event signs on their property, which are currently prohibited. And they're the ones that I've been telling the community is going to address this. The community is going to address this. And they've been patiently waiting to see where the town's going with that.
Joe, that signs fall under ZBA. What are your thoughts?
It needs, well, like Eric was saying, it's a lot of it is ambiguous. A lot of it has to be cleaned up, and I think it has to have stiffer rules as to what's allowed. Right now, it seems like a lot of people want what they want, and whether they're abutting a residential neighborhood and their sign is going to be lit up all night and it's going to be giving some light damage to neighbors, they're really not considering any of that. They want what they want. The number of signs, we run into trouble like this all the time. People want extra signage or at a different angle because of where their building is located. They want to make sure that they're capturing traffic immediately. It's popping out at traffic in both directions instead of having a flat on the building that everybody can see. They want something a little bit different. And it almost sounds like sometimes people are trying to maybe outdo their neighbors' signs. They want a little more name recognition. Another thing that we want is clarification on the amount of signs that seem to be going up on Route 3. If we want to look like Route 1 in Saugus, that's one thing, if the town wants that. If the town does not want that, we're going to have certain limits on the number of those signs that, you know, in the future, we're thinking down the road in the future. There is a certain amount of revenue that is made from those signs. And I believe, you know, people have the right to do what they want with their own property, but within the confines of the town regulations, we have to have some sort of mandate as to what's going to be allowed and how many and in what locations. So getting back again, to get us out of, in trouble with people that want to do their own thing, I think it has to be clarified, and I think it has to be literally like a table that would help, like Eric was saying, something that was bone stock clean and clear so that people can understand it with no ambiguities.
Okay.
You're always going to have somebody that says, hey, my name is, 20 letters long. I need a bigger sign, right? They're always going to be coming in for an appeal. We've had some very interesting, which we've been on both sides. Zoning has been on both sides. For instance, you'll have one building, and that building is allowed a certain number of signs of a certain number of size. But inside that building that can be subdividable, but isn't, there are 3 licensed businesses operating in that building. In order for them to maintain their business license, each business has to have a sign. So I can see that as being a problem, but the person comes back and says, well, I'm going to keep the signs per the right size, but I just need more of them because I've got more businesses. And that went through, and that had a special problem with it, but we got through it, and it's working fine. As far as I know, there are no complaints. The business owner is happy. The licensee is happy. The owners of the business. We have other particular people that may think that they are accredited with more signage when they see something like that, right? Say, well, that's Charlie's business, but he has 3 licenses, and so he has 3 sets of signs. So I want to have, I want to have 3, I want to have 4, I want to, whatever. So it has to be crystal clear.
Bob, Judy, what do you, you chime in on this?
Well, a couple of comments. Because as Eric has pointed out, and we've talked about this before with you, the current sign bylaw is really needs rewriting and reformatting and reorganization, and going to tables will can immensely help things just as a start. So I've been going through it, trying to figure out how best to just reorganize as a first step what's there. And because once you do that, you actually start finding things that you don't know is in there, or things that might conflict with each other because it's in a table and it jumps off a table at you, but you don't see it when it's buried in language. So just to have you use a good foundation of what's there as a starting point to start amending it to deal with the kinds of issues, particularly Joe, you've just been mentioning. So that will take a little while. I am actually working with another town at the moment on rewriting their sign bylaw. So some of the things that are going on there, I think we can translate into Tyngsborough as well. The other issue, of course, is that we've mentioned is this whole Supreme Court case from, must be 6 years ago now, Reed versus Gilbert, that dramatically restricted how towns can address signs, particularly non-commercial signs, and dramatically change how commercial signs can be restricted or not restricted, regulated, but non-commercial signs because of free speech issues under the Constitution. So I'll have to address some of that in your bylaw. That's a moving target. There have been a variety of court cases since then. Luckily, the last couple of cases, and one just came out of the Seventh Circuit Court, which in Wisconsin, that upheld, we now have two cases upholding the right of towns to regulate off-premise signs differently than on-premise signs, off-premise signs, i.e. billboards. So that was a big help to towns. So there'll be some changes related to that. And then, Joe, is, how big's too big? How big is not big enough? You just going to have to make some judgments at some point. How many signs are okay and how many signs are too many, and for this position, for this kind of use and that kind of location or whatever. And we can make some proposals and some drafts, but that's going to be the big discussion, I think, is where's the balance for Tyngsborough? You just have to drive around and go through a town, one of which has already been mentioned, that allows pretty much everything for towns. And then at the other end of the spectrum, some towns pay a lot more attention to the design of the sign as much as, sort of how big it is. If it's a good design, you're gonna get a better sign, whatever. So where's the balance for Tyngsborough?
So I guess what I'm hearing, Bob, is then really reorganizing our current sign bylaw would be the first place to start then, and then kind of tweaking it from there.
That's my approach. If you want a different approach, I'm happy to talk about it, but I think really taking the language you have and trying to get it in some kind of better organized fashion, tables and whatnot, will give you a clearer picture of what you have and what you don't have and what needs to change.
So Eric, would that work for you to have Bob start reorganizing, and then fall town meeting, we would have something to present to the town, do you think? Because I think you're absolutely right. We've got to get some town input on this and see how the town feels about changing things up like this.
Yeah, I don't know if town meeting is the right venue. I mean, it's up to you if you want to ask the select board if there's an opportunity to present on the issue, just to give them a heads up. At least you have the right audience, and everybody will, next time they come back with, things to vote on, they'll say, they won't say this is the first time we've heard of this. They'll have already been informed that this committee is working on this issue and that there'll be other opportunities for them to weigh in, et cetera. So I think the committee will probably have its hands full enough with regards to coming up with drafts and things like that, that you probably won't be looking towards community engagement on sign bylaws before May 9th. So like you said, coming up with an example, some like a primer that they can understand what's coming, what the reasons are behind it, and to expect, when should they expect amendments to come before them to vote. If I was going to be greedy, one of the things that I might request, only because I have tried to make promises to members of the community about it, is to see if the committee is interested or willing to take an iterative approach to an amendment to the sign regulations to help educational organizations within town provide electronic signs to inform the public of events. Yes, it would be sort of like a side project. It doesn't necessarily, it doesn't simplify the sign regulations, it's additive. However, I don't know if the town itself is interested in having the Academy of Notre Dame, the Greater Lowell Tech, its own high school, and others wait another cycle to know where they're headed with ordering these types of signs. They're hoping that there might be some feedback and some progress and a question posed to town meeting in May that helps them create these types of resources for the town.
So have they been specific about what size they want? They want electronic, they want flashing, they want to put them out on the streets? What?
They can provide those types of details to you, and I think that the zoning review committee has an opportunity to weigh in on what they think is appropriate or not, and then craft something that the rest of either the planning board and or the town can decide is appropriate or not. Based on the requests that the schools have described to me, they don't seem obnoxious. They're okay with electronic signs that don't have anything that's moving or animated. They just need an easy way to get signs updated so that somebody doesn't have to walk all the way down the quad or the campus, change out, 37 different letters to get us, the next week's event updated, and do it like twice a week. It's when the technology is out there to get it done in like 3 minutes. They're looking for an opportunity to get valuable information to the community, updated much faster.
Most schools have that.
I understand.
I mean,
They
it's
they they
everywhere.
would agree.
It's everywhere.
So Bob, could you come up with some sort of language that would address that, or maybe there's something already existing that you could shoot our way to look at?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I agree with you, Eric. That might just be something really easy to do to add to what's kind of a mess with our sign bylaw, but certainly something that is a need at the moment. And
Yep.
And I think that'd work out well for everyone.
I mean, I'm here to represent the business community too, but even if they have to wait a little bit longer, I think they're doing okay. At the very least, helping what I would consider, what's the right way to put it? Schools have a very specific need, and the public itself has a very specific interest in knowing what the information schools have to share. So addressing that first was probably, at the very least, a good way to start.
Now, would that also be something that we could, because I know right at the bridge, they always have a sign there when there's town meeting coming up or block party, that kind of thing. Something that we could use to incorporate whatever this change to the bylaw would be to help those type things out too.
Yeah, I mean, depending on the language that Bob comes up with, and I didn't mean to cut you off there, Bob, looked like you might have had an answer. I mean, it would just be a simple matter of saying schools and or, municipal organizations or the municipality itself. You just group it together.
So just as an addenda, I guess, the term that's been used, sort of event signs, school event signs, that's problematic. Using the word event, that was actually the basis of the Supreme Court case, was some.
Oh, I don't think I wasn't specifying that it would just be an event sign. I said that was one of the pieces of information.
You have to focus on, yes, you're allowing electronic and it's this size and this height and this location, but
Yep.
what they put on it could be the event or could just be,
Oh, you muted yourself somehow.
it could be, not just events, they could put, teacher of the month up there or whatever, so.
The irony that you muted yourself during a freedom of speech sentence is not lost on me.
I'm censoring myself illegally.
Anybody else on the board have anything to weigh in on as far as this goes?
The only thing I would say is by raising the sign piece and having something ready for town meeting during those discussions, we can indicate that we should give people, here's what the longer term plan is, right?
Mm-hmm.
That we're not just adding this in here and ignoring the sign. We know that much needs to be done. And here's, we're looking at that. We're gonna make it a little bit clearer. That's not going to be ready for this town meeting, but expect something in either fall, or some folks want to push for annual town meetings for all those types of things. I think if we could get our ducks in a row and have everything addressed, then a fall town meeting would definitely be something that we could look at doing,
And
because there is a need.
We did promise at the last town meeting that we would have updates to our sign bylaw in the spring. So I think this would at least show that we're working on something, even though it's not the full package yet. So,
Eric, what are the chances we can move town meeting to like July 12th? No, I'm just kidding.
0. It's in our bylaws. The date is set.
Yep.
May
Too
2nd.
late. Yeah.
So you can plan all your vacation time and
Yeah.
everything. You can plan it years in advance.
It's May 2nd, that's a Tuesday
Yes.
night?
Yes.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah, Eric, I think I think it's still wrong in some of your timelines. Because
Oh,
I
I'm
thought I
sorry.
saw May 9th in there.
Yes, you did. I just changed it to the second, so at least in my notes.
My apologies.
I don't know.
No, we blamed Colin on that, remember, Eric?
That's true. He did mislead us briefly.
All right, I guess we've covered everything on the agenda, although not necessarily in that order. Anybody else have anything else they would like to discuss this evening or go back over again? I know we've all made notes on what we have for homework. And so. All right, well, seeing nothing else, then I guess we'll have our next meeting, which will just be this group without Bob and Judy on February the 7th. And did we decide whether we wanted to do that live or remotely?
As a facilitator, I feel very comfortable with the remote component.
Okay.
But does anybody else feel like they're less productive in this method?
Anyone? Okay, then remote it is on the 7th. The other dates will we discuss as we approach them, but we've made our decisions on when they are anyway. So, well, with that, I would guess I would look for a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Second,
All those in favor?
aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you so much, everybody.